Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, it's weird not being able to actually hear the feedback out of these. I'm Jeff Caden. I'm a systems engineer on our cloud infrastructure team. We've had about 12 job titles over the years, so I have to think for a second. I joined Twilio coming up on 3 years ago, kind of an old-timer by our standards. In my last job, we were trying to migrate all of our infrastructure into AWS, and I found whenever, I consulted the documentation, Stack Overflow. People said there's this way to do it or the Twilio way. So when I started looking for a new job, I thought it'd be really cool to actually join the people who are writing the book. I think we've added a chapter today, and that's what we're talking about.
So as Sam and Jeff mentioned, my name is Dom. We can't hear me at all? No, we can? Oh, cool. I didn't do anything. This is fantastic. If you can't tell, that one is me. My name is Dom, and I am another engineer on the infrastructure ever-changing platform team. And so at around 3 years, I'll give you a little bit of a history about myself, and then kind of move into a little bit what we'll talk about today. So I started off as a desktop technician, and I utilized my own laziness to start scripting things, and then from there, I actually moved on into being a system administrator, and when I joined Twilio, I joined the ever-changing, ever-evolving platform engineering team. While Jeff's been really focused on that VPC migration that he was talking about, what I've been really focused on, more of a little hyper-focus, was looking at our cloud infrastructure and our cloud infrastructure security and how we interact with that. And so that's kind of a little bit of what we'll talk about today. So hopefully a lot of you will stick around and listen to the next talk after hours, which is from our security team. Our security team does an amazing job at talking about how we keep ourselves, our customer data, away from the evils of the world. And while they do a fantastic job, and I highly encourage you to go and see that talk after this one, that's not really what Jeff and I are focused on. You see, our great security team does great at keeping us protected from the evils of the world, but what we do is we protect us from ourselves.
Not naming names.
And so what do I really mean by protecting from ourselves? Well, I'll put it in two ways. The first is, how do we protect our platform engineering teams from becoming just button pushers and just these gatekeepers of the infrastructure? And the second is kind of an answer to the first, which is how do we create some self-service tools that will enable our developers to do what they need to do, but also have the necessary guardrails so that we don't accidentally have a catastrophe. And so, like Jeff and I both mentioned, we have system administration backgrounds. And with that system administration backgrounds comes a little bit of a saying. The best way the best tool that a system admin has is their own laziness. If you do it more than twice, you will likely script it so you never have to do it again. And so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit more on how we utilize that laziness of ours and actually ended up doing some really good work around kind of this self-service tool.
Yeah, so today's TLDR, we're going to go over exactly what the problems are that we're experiencing here, like the sort of things we run into on a day-to-day basis, and sort of the flip side of that coin, exactly what can go wrong if you get it wrong, and then hopefully the solutions for the problems, and also the how to make the entire process less work for you so that you can presumably do better things.
Great. So, again, what we're really going to talk about is, while there are a lot of things that platform engineering teams have that are technically toil in their everyday work, we're really going to focus on AWS and the permissions within AWS that your engineers will be inevitably asking for. So it is no secret at all that Twilio loves AWS. We like to pride ourselves on being a company that's filled with developers, but not only just developers, but developers who have knowledge of our own infrastructure. And from that, we have small, empowered teams that are able to do what they need to do and hit the ground running.
Yeah, and to make that happen, we have a really great suite of tools in order to abstract away the really hairy parts of this. a lot of our philosophical points, like those of you who have heard of like immutable instances, like there's a lot of things we do to reduce the cognitive load of operating your own services. And you can think of this, I think one of the guys from Uber alluded to this in the keynote. You can think of this as sort of a microcosm of Twilio proper. Like if there's anybody in the audience who's a SIP expert, I'm sure you can all stand up your own global asterisk infrastructure and you don't need Twilio and then form relationships with carriers. What could be easier? For the rest of us, it's easier just to import Twilio and get on your way than it is to spend years in like Cisco training courses. So we're doing that internally for Twilio. We're trying to abstract away the really hairy, awkward parts, like ARP tables or DHCP proxies, or you don't even need to be able to understand LDAP filter syntax in order to get a hello world off the ground at Twilio. And that's what our job is.
So really, we kind of take care of that like hard part of that every engineer has to go through. And by doing this, we've done two things. One, we've made sure that they do it our way or the right way. And the second thing that we do is that we ensure that this is consistent across our entire organization, so that the way that, let's say, our authentication services are for one person are the same that it would be for another. And so...
What are you thinking?
Thinking if I should switch yet, but I don't.
That's the best part.
And so, for us here, I'm going to do a little bit of background and history on how Twilio has scaled and the things that we've tried over time. And then I'll hand off to Jeff in a little bit, who will kind of go over the way that we're kind of moving forward in the future. So when you are a company that is started by developers, those developers generally have a really great understanding of their infrastructure. And we pride ourselves on being that company. But as your company starts to grow and scale, the engineers start to change. And they become really hyper-focused on the product, which is absolutely fantastic. But some of the things that happen is that a little bit of the infrastructure can start to fall. Not necessarily fall, but not be as monitored. And so what we want to do is you want to start to hire teams like us. You want to have these type of squad goals, right? You want to have the type of... you want to have a specific engineering team that would basically be focused on just the infrastructure. Now, the problem here is that a lot of times it's not exactly easy to remove permissions away from people who've always had them. Really, it's called I can't even say it. But so the thing about this is that when I showed this to some developers before, it seemed to have made sense because they were Captain America and they were the hero.
It was a selfie.
Yeah, it was like a selfie to them. But really, what this is a great representation of me and Jeff, continuously angry, and sometimes we wear an eye patch. But what this really is AWS. How do we enable our users to use AWS in a way that is safe and secure? Well, so AWS actually kind of allows us to do this by managing all of the permissions that it allows us to do through API-level access controls using IAM, or Identity Access Management. And so what this does is it definitely levels some controls as to what actions a user is able to do, and also to what resources they're able to use those actions against. Inevitably, the first person that's hired onto any platform engineering team will probably be a little bit in over their head. Are we getting intimate lighting? Okay.
Yeah, it's getting intimate.
Okay, so inevitably that first platform person will be a little bit in over their head. And the first thing that they want to do is find out what permissions have been given out, or how do I enable developers to have permissions. So one of the first things that you'll do is that we did was we asked our engineers to go ahead and curate group policies based off of what type of permissions they needed. This was great. Now you ask for a group policy, you ask to be added to a group, all I have to do, add you to the group, and there we go. The problem with that is necessarily not everybody knows what a group policy is or what they really need. And the worst thing that can happen, well, we'll go through this first, I guess. So for us, when people ask for being added to a group policy, AWS makes it super easy. They give us a plethora of tools like the command line tools or Bodo or a bunch of other SDKs that wrap it into quick three little lines of code here. But again, if you don't know what you're looking for, you can essentially come across these. This is terrible. This is the equivalent of Miley Cyrus's wrecking ball. This is a foot gun. This is something that you do not want to see in your organization.
This is really convenient if you like add API keys to this and just check them right into GitHub, because
Yeah,
that way
you can
like
hard
you
code
can always
those
have
in.
them. You never need to
Perfect.
worry about losing those.
So what this is actually doing is, I'll give you kind of a little bit of a idea. Say that you have this policy. You're not necessarily just giving everybody like sudo access on every production server. You're giving them root and administrator access to a whole bunch of other actions and calls to everything that holds your servers. Somebody with these permissions can go in and essentially do EC2 delete. Someone can go in and essentially do IAM delete users, or or create users that are not in your organization. These are things you do not want. And so what we did instead is we had to really take a look and start to do a little education process about what these policies look like. And we did a little bit of a scaffolding and structure. The first of which is we scraped all the users with admin permissions, got rid of those. The next is we sat with teams and product owners. We invested our time to find out what they actually needed. And then using that, we defined and scoped levels of permission so that the permissions to do read and write are not necessarily the same as deleting. And then we created those groups for them. We made those groups as easy as possible to find using, this is my team, this is the group, these are the permissions that we have. So I'm going to have Jeff kind of jump over to terminal really quick. Great. Great. So let's give just like a little bit of an example. Can you go into the cat out an example policy and cat out the example S3? Great. So while this is still a little bit broad, this is a lot better than what we were seeing before. This at least scopes the permissions down. I have this? No, I don't. So this at least scopes permissions down into something that's manageable for what this user can do with S3. So let's go ahead and kind of see this a little bit more in action. Except for instead of applying this policy, it's intern season. So let's go ahead and get an intern some permissions here. Jeff, will you jump into, yep, there you go. So we set up a fake instance here for just a ticketing service purposes. And here's, let's say, an intern called WileyCat that really wants to get permissions. So what we'll do here is if you jump back to terminal, those 3 or 4 lines of CLI or Bodo or anything like that, we went ahead and did a quick little wrapper to change that up. So if you do, I think it's Python auto IAM, and then do provision, and then just write in the ticket number, which is, I think, IR 5033. Perfect. All right, so what this is doing is it's running through all of those 4 lines before, and then it adds a comment, and great. So normally what this does is it goes ahead and wraps everything up and encrypts it and sends it over to our user so that it doesn't live in a local environment. However, for the purpose of this demo, can you cat out the WileyCat loaded modes? Yeah. This is what a user will see. And before my security team has an entire heart attack, don't worry, this is not our stuff. But our user will get their user ID, their access key, their secret access key ID, and a temporary password to log into the console to be able to change those, to change their console password. But we didn't do everything that WileyCat asked. We need to add WileyCat to some permissions because they're not really doing anything now. And they asked to be added to the Thunder Kittens role, the group. So go back in, and yes. So do provision, the same thing, IR 5033, and then -- groups, Thunder Kittens. Great. And while there's not a whole lot of input or output here, great. Can you just jump back over to that ticket and we'll show that refresh? The comments are automatically added, and the toil on my team is very minimalized. But we wanted to make this a step further and not necessarily just make this for our team. So go ahead and jump back into terminal. All right, so these are tools that would be available to our users. As WileyCat, let's go ahead and do Python auto IAM check user and WileyCat. There we go. Now, at any given time, WilyCat can check, oh, I can't do these things. What permissions do I have to be able to do? They're able to check that directly and not have to bother our team. The next thing is, let's say that WilyCat went on vacation and had a lot of fun and totally doesn't remember their API keys. Go ahead and do, reset user. WilyCat. There we go. And again, dash API. And again, these are not necessarily just done to standard out. These are sent to them in an encrypted file. But for the purpose of this, there we go. So now WilyCat is able to check what they are able to do as far as actions and on what resources. And WilyCat is also able to reset their own user accounts. But like I said, I want to not panic my security team. Can we go ahead and deprovision that user? Yep. And then just the ticket number. And so again, this is just it's just a quick little wrapper around those Bodo calls. And then go into the ticket. Oh, not yet. Sorry. Yes? And then the ticket. And refresh. So one little thing that we were able to do here is that the entire life cycle of that intern is entirely in that ticket. So we can see when they asked, why they asked for it, if their manager had approved, and when it was provisioned and deprovisioned. And so there we go, self-service, we're done, except for we did experience a couple of problems. Would you hop right back into that one? There we go, perfect. So one of the big things here is that while this seemed to have worked, this worked and mostly benefited our team. While those like 3 or 4 commands weren't a whole lot of effort, they did cost a platform engineer to switch contexts, run these things, and then have to switch back. Mentally, that takes a lot of effort. So we did solve that problem, but what we didn't solve is the fact that this process used static keys, and they weren't attached to any corporate identity like LDAP, Okta, Active Directory. And the biggest thing there is that it's not managed by IT or HR. There's 2 huge things here. Most of the onboarding and offboarding processes are managed by one of those 2 departments. And neither of those departments have access to AWS in the way that we do. So if, let's say, an intern happily did their internship and left, WilyCat, if there was any hole in that process, WilyCat would actually continually take their keys and be happily on their way. Alternatively, if, let's say, I was just done being a platform engineer and I wanted to do some more voice magic, I can essentially move and take my administrative keys with me.
You'd be very popular.
I would, and probably not in the ways that I want to be too. And then the second thing is, or the last thing is, again, static keys. That is terrible. Potentially that allowed users to keep static keys on their local environment. It also potentially allowed them to check it into an application, check it into GitHub. And what we needed to do really was find a way to have a good life cycle on those keys, something that we weren't manually checking on and manually pushing out an email that said, hey, it's been 90 days. You should reset your keys. And so what we're going to do here is I'm going to hand off to Jeff, and Jeff's going to talk a little bit more about the future of what we're going to try to do here using federated management.
Yeah, so this has been pretty doom and gloom so far. We've just been identifying problems and telling you all the terrible things that could happen. And we don't usually run into like silver bullets in this line of work, but this case we did find a silver bullet in the form of federated identity management. It solved all this and also a bunch of like problems we didn't even know we had, which is a nice change of pace for us. And federated identity management is exactly what it sounds like. We're just taking authentication, authorization, all that jazz, making it somebody else's problem. Amazon provides a couple of options in this space. You can use big names like Google, sign in with Gmail, sign in with Facebook, or Amazon Cognito if that's your thing. Or you can just use any generic OpenID Connect or SAML 2.0 provider. So you might be actually scratching your head at this point because I haven't said anything about IAM users. I've only been talking about roles. And one of the problems that we didn't know we had that we magically solved is that this is opening the door to a really powerful form of role-based access control. And by way of comparison, like with Unix permissions, like you would just expect, you have 2 roles. You're either unprivileged normal user or you're root. If you're just doing day-to-day things, you're yourself. If you want to do anything else, you have to go up to root, and then you have like all the keys to the kingdom. Like it's not even like that's not even role-based. There's no granularity. It's completely black and white. In this case, we would partition off our different permissions into different roles, so that even if you did something incredibly stupid, you're minimizing the blast radius. You have a role that's only empowered for one stack, let's say. So if you RM RF or the equivalent, you lose your job, but you don't lose everybody else's jobs along with you. So not only does this actually, oh, I'm sorry about that. The actual plumbing for this is provided by STS, like probably the least exciting product in Amazon's portfolio. What actually happens is that you'll authenticate against your whatever identity provider you want, and they'll come back with some sort of cookie token. I don't know. It's implementation specific. Then you can take this and bring it back with this magic line that shows the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, for those of you who are confused. Shibboleth is the working example I have here. I'll talk more about that in a second. It comes back with an assertion, cookie, whatever you want to call it. Then you can take this over to STS, and assuming that all checks out, it'll come back with a set of temporary API keys that are good for between 15 or 60 minutes, depending upon how you've configured it. And that way, even if somebody walks away, even if somebody gets fired, there's only 45 minutes where they can cause damage to the company. So let's actually dig a little bit deeper into how this works. Mind if I grab the podium for a second?
There you go.
Yeah, sorry in advance. So I mentioned we could do Google, Facebook, Cognito. The best application for our purposes was SAML. For those of you who don't really grok the full security alphabet soup, SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. It's just a standard data format for providing authentication and metadata in a trusted fashion from one party to another. It's definitely super 90s, which is why you see all this goddamn XML all over the place. And like, there's a lot of it. Most of it isn't interesting. Down at the bottom here, we actually get to some interesting stuff. Up top, there's things like validity window and like authentication mechanism in case you want to change something based on whether there's a second factor associated with it. The interesting things here, the one line that goes all the way across the screen is you can see demo role at the end. This is one role that Shibboleth has decided that I am authorized to assume. Up at the top, there's another one, engineer role. Depending upon how we've configured it, this could turn out to be anything. Oh, I should probably have brought the thing with me. So we're actually going to see this in action. I've stood up a Shibboleth identity provider. This is the Apache open source standard. It's just really the easiest thing to do. And there's no built-in data store. So it's backed by a LDAP instance co-located on that thing. Since I'm a Python zealot, we're going to do this all in IPython. And it's actually really easy. If you print out the... I've imported everything from this demo module because there's a lot of XML parsing you guys don't want to see. So if you just print out SSO_URL, you'll see the endpoint here. I'm sorry, print it out. Yeah, this is the name of my identity provider. What we're going to do with this, just use requests to post directly to that with your username and password. REST requests. You got it. And then auth equals parentheses, yeah. Oh, sorry, requests. The other thing I should call out that you can't see behind the scenes here, normally API keys you use as sort of a out-of-band authentication, out-of-band like emergency mechanism. In this case, I can only hit this endpoint while I'm on the VPN. So like security people tend to get nervous because these API keys can be used anywhere. In this case, you at least need to be behind this one wall before you can start breaking things on this level. That makes me nervous because since it is like an emergency break glass, like this introduces a chicken and egg problem, but security might be happy about it, and when they're happy, I tend to be happy. So this isn't exciting. We can extract the SAML that came from there. Yeah, I've got the extract SAML. underscore. And this is, can you tell us what the rest? You did rest. Cool. So again, this is a brand new fresh assertion. This looks a lot like what you'd seen on the screen earlier. In this case, it's the same thing, but newer and equally painful to look at. The real magic happens here when we introduce STS to this equation. And I said it's only one API call. So let's connect. Interesting to note, can you toss in the anon equals true? For those of you who use Bodo on a regular basis, usually these connect calls expect credentials to be available in your environment. Since we don't have credentials yet, that's the whole purpose of this exercise. This is the one Amazon service that lets us bind anonymously until we can actually credential ourselves up. So at this point, the API call is assume role of SAML. And what we're going to do can you print out, I think it's demo underscore role? Sorry. Sorry, print it out. Print the lowercase d.
Oh, print the lowercase d?
Yeah. Yeah. This is the name of the role we're about to assume. It's going to be incredibly exciting. The actual API call, I think you'll do c.assume role with SAML. Yeah, oh, sorry. And it's subtly caps.
What's that?
Does that tab out?
For the demo role?
Does assume role with SAML tab out?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just psyching myself out. So the first argument you're going to want to pass is that demo underscore role. The second one is the name of the identity provider. In this case, it's Shibboleth, because I'm deeply creative. The last thing there is the SAML assertion that we just pulled out of all that gobbledygook. Hit the button. Oh no, what are the odds that would happen? So this, one of the things that might have made you twitch a little bit is the thought that, like, you register this identity provider, the barn doors are wide open. The identity provider can do whatever it wants. That's not the case. We actually have to opt all of these roles in one by one in order to, like, completely make it work or bypass security depending upon your perspective. And in this case, we just happened to find a role that wasn't part of this whole system. So if you, now can you cat out the capital D demo role? This is the role trust policy for the demo role. Those of you who sort of casually use IAM, like these are sort of like a weird dark corner that you normally, like it seems like unnecessary boilerplate. Whenever you create a role, you need to pass this in there. Like nobody knows why, it's just junk. It's one of these things you generally don't need to understand. You don't understand until you really need to. However, this says only EC2, the service itself, is allowed to assume the role. This is like a machine role. A human like me and presumably Dom would not be able to assume this. Human? Okay. So if you can, I have another one in there, engineer role trust. Yeah. So this looks like what we'd expect to see. All we're doing is authorizing the Shibboleth provider to assume this role, assuming that users are authenticated. So if we pull up that assume role of SAML thing again, but this time let's do engineer role instead of demo role. Wow, that was exciting. Big finale. Since a lot of the IAM APIs there's a bit of verbosity in here. So like creds, I think you have to do like creds.credentials.access key in order. I don't know. It's wrapped in like 4 different envelopes. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to print out the secret key here, but long story short, we're in. What else can we do at this point? Can you use again imported from that demo, the demo file? Can you use the build underscore con and pass in creds as an argument? This is a wrapper function. Since there is so much goddamn envelope, I think it's build con. Yeah, there we go. And just pass in creds. Cool. Yeah, just a wrapper function so that you don't need to watch us unravel all these envelopes all the time. And do IAM equals underscore. At this point, I do want to point out, if you run IAM.get underscore user, this obviously wouldn't work because we're not a user at all. We're a role. But this is an important thing to point out. A few of the earlier implementations we attempted to do never included Dominique's name in this. Like, this is what appears in audits and console logs. So if Dominique does something stupid and destroys the world, you know, we're all dead. But at least you didn't do it anonymously. A few of the early implementations didn't have this, so people could anonymously destroy the world. One last role to look at. Let's check out, try to assume the scout role. These are all Team Fortress themed roles because that's how Twilio infrastructure works. Yep. Okay, another 404. Sorry, 403. This one actually makes sense. SAML assertion doesn't contain the requested role. If you had bothered to read that, 5 megabytes of XML, you would have seen that scout role is contained nowhere in there. So this is where things start coming together for us. I think I have Apache Directory Studio open somewhere. Yeah. So if you drill down, sorry about the font size on this. It's not the best GUI anybody's ever seen. If you drill down into groups, yeah. So check out the scout role. There's only one user who's a member of that. So let's change Foobar, that poor guy, into DeGuzman. Cool. So now you're part of this group. Let's jump back to the terminal. The SAML assertion did not contain scout role, so we need to do a fresh login. It's only the ticket is only good for maybe 5 minutes, so we're not the window here isn't too broad. But if you search back for the post, we can re-authenticate. Cool. Then take that and again use the extract SAML method. Cool. And if you have really good eyes, you will now see scout role in that. Hooray, that's the magic. So now if you wanted to, you could call the assume role with SAML. This is moderately painful, unless you love IPython as much as I do. So let's actually crack open a browser window here. And if you go to idp.vote, if you go to that same sign-in URL, this will actually provide us with my identity provider. Then we authenticate, and this takes us right into the Amazon console, where it presents us with a nice list of roles that we can use at this point. So it's really not hard to imagine different use cases we could use for this. There's a lot of power in SAML I didn't explore. You can do arbitrary transforms on LDAP data. You can provide different levels of access depending upon the authentication method. So from here, we could do all sorts of great things, maybe one role is super privileged and only the engineering managers, who are also a member of the infrastructure team, are allowed to do EC2 destroy the world, or maybe S3 destroy all my important content, is only available to users who have authenticated with a password and second factor in the past 5 minutes. There's a lot of power here that I haven't explored because it's a lot of XML, and Jesus, I don't have that much time on my hands. And what else can we do with this? Oh, one of the really cool things, I can actually get it ready for the demo. We could actually string together a couple of trust policies here so that you would actually need 2 separate users to authenticate, like the nuclear football, 2 guys turn the key at the same time before actually launching the nukes. This opens up a lot of doors for us, and it's pretty cool. Do you want to go back into the TLDR recap?
Yeah. Basically, it too long, didn't watch. I kind of just wandered into this talk.
Or change the channel on your microphone.
So what we really wanted to explore here, both in this talk and over the last couple of quarters at Twilio, is how we can enable that self-service. And the first thing that we wanted to really hone in on is how it works. Being able to trust those infrastructure engineering teams to be the only administrators that are necessary, right? You don't necessarily need keys to the kingdom all the time, but you do need to have someone with actual infrastructure knowledge to have those keys. The next is to really define and scope those permissions. Laziness is not something that belongs in this particular part. Be specific on what you need in those roles. And then the last is really what Jeff was talking about, being able to utilize different parts of AWS, such as STS and federated management with corporate identities to it actually relieved the toil on our teams and kind of gave that power back to the IT teams.
So myself, possibly Dom, maybe other humans, I'm a real big believer in minimalist, lightweight tooling. So I'm really excited how many different options this one integration opens up for us. Amazon, it keeps rolling out a lot of really cool services, all of which are hamstrung by the same user management nightmare. So it's nice to actually have a solution to that. I think once we open the floodgates for Twilio internal engineering, you're going to see a lot of really cool stuff emerge from the engineering organization as a result of that. Thanks.
Thank you.